like a lot, every day. Guys, I cannot travel because I'm going through immigration. And who reported me like 3 times. I really miss my family in Panama. And when the holidays are coming, I start to feel sad.
The news hit like a punch to the chest. Jasmine Pineda, the woman who once lit up 90 Day Fiancé with her fire and charm, was suddenly given 30 days to pack up her life and leave the United States. No warning, no time to breathe, just a letter stamped with finality. What she didn't expect, though, was that the man she trusted most, Matt, would vanish right when she needed him the most. His silence spoke louder than any goodbye ever could. Hey everyone, this is Sabrina, and welcome back to TLC Drama Live, where we break down the real stories behind the reality chaos. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the person you trusted most disappeared when your whole life was collapsing? Because that's exactly what happened to Jasmine. At first, she thought there had to be some mistake. Immigration paperwork can be messy, sure, but deportation, 30 days to leave a country where she had built everything, from her relationship to her reputation, that wasn't supposed to happen. Not to someone who gave her entire life to make this work. But as she held that letter, trembling, she noticed something else missing. Matt wasn't there. He hadn't called. He hadn't even texted. It was as if he'd evaporated from her world. She spent hours calling his phone, staring at her screen like it might answer back. Nothing. Not even a, "Hey, I'm here." People close to her said she was pacing through her apartment, whispering to herself that maybe he was just busy, maybe filming ran long, maybe he'd walk through the door any second. But every hour that passed made one truth impossible to ignore. Matt had gone quiet at the exact moment her world was falling apart. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's punishment. The irony was brutal. For months, Jasmine had fought to prove her love was real. To the fans, to TLC, to the immigration officers who looked at her life like it was a checklist. But now, the very foundation of that proof, her partner, had disappeared. Without Matt's support, her immigration status hung by a thread. Without him beside her, the story she told in every interview, "We're building a future together," sounded like a line from a show that had already ended. Inside, something shifted. The anger started small, sitting behind her ribs, quiet but hot. She told a friend that if Matt had chosen this moment to abandon her, he wasn't just breaking up with her. He was betraying every sacrifice she made to be here. The move from Panama, the years of criticism, the tears she'd turned into sound bites for TLC. Every bit of pain she defended as love. As the hours became days, the silence turned from confusion into fear. Immigration deadlines don't wait for heartbreak. Lawyers called, emails piled up, and Jasmine's mind spiraled between hope and panic. Was this really happening? Would she be forced to leave everything behind while the man who promised her forever couldn't even pick up the phone? One night, exhausted and desperate, she opened her messages again, scrolling, refreshing, praying for anything. That's when she noticed something strange. A name she didn't recognize kept popping up in Matt's recent contacts. A woman's name. And buried in the old threads, a message from weeks earlier, short but haunting. She doesn't suspect anything yet. Jasmine froze, the glow from her screen lighting up her tear-streaked face. Her breath caught in her throat as one thought hit harder than the deportation letter itself. Matt wasn't missing. He was hiding. And someone else knew why. What she found next would turn heartbreak into something far darker. Jasmine had always said that love shouldn't feel like paperwork. It should feel like laughter in the kitchen, long talks before bed, and someone waiting for you at the airport. But with Matt, the dream slowly turned into deadlines, forms, and endless questions from people who didn't care about how much you loved, only if they believed it. The fiery romance that once made her feel alive had been replaced by late-night panic over missing documents and immigration interview prep that felt more like a courtroom than a love story. When they first met, Matt had been the calm to her storm. He promised her safety, stability, a future that wouldn't vanish like her past heartbreak with Gino. Jasmine, who once swore she'd never cry over a man again, found herself believing him. They were filming, smiling, traveling, doing all the things that made fans think they were solid. But behind the scenes, Jasmine was learning the hard truth that love on TV comes with fine print. Every laugh on camera had a price off screen. Stress, anxiety, and constant fear that one wrong word in an interview could destroy everything she'd built. She tried to turn the nerves into jokes. Told Matt she felt like she was in an FBI interrogation instead of proving she was in love. He laughed, but not kindly. He told her to calm down, that she was being too emotional. That phrase always landed like a slap. Jasmine wasn't emotional, she was terrified. The interview was everything. If it went wrong, her entire life in America could end with a signature. On the morning of the appointment, she dressed carefully, hoping her red blouse might make her look confident instead of scared. She rehearsed their story again and again. How they met, their favorite foods, who takes the trash out, how often they argue. It's strange how love can be reduced to trivia when the government gets involved, but Jasmine kept smiling, telling herself they'd pass easily because what they had was real. Inside the room, though, something shifted. The officer asked about her previous marriage, and her hands started to tremble. When they mentioned Gino's name, her throat closed up. Old wounds reopened in seconds. She tried to steady her breathing, but anxiety doesn't listen to logic. One question blurred into the next. She stammered, paused too long, mixed up small details. At one point she said Gino instead of Matt. That tiny slip changed everything. Matt's face went pale, but not with worry. For himself. He looked embarrassed, maybe even annoyed. After the interview, Jasmine burst into tears, begging him to understand it was an accident, that stress had gotten to her. But instead of holding her, he told her she needed to get herself together. She felt like she was crumbling while he was already stepping away. Sometimes the worst heartbreak isn't loud. It's when someone quietly stops caring right in front of you. The following week, when the letter came, the one stamped with order of deportation, Jasmine stopped feeling like a person and started feeling like a case file. She kept replaying that moment in the interview room, wondering if her mistake had cost her everything. But deep down, something else was bothering her. It wasn't just the paperwork or the failed questions. It was Matt's distance, the way he had stopped looking at her like a partner and more like an obligation. That night, she sat on the couch, scrolling through old photos of them smiling in New York, in love, full of plans. Now, even those pictures looked fake. Something about Matt had changed. The warmth was gone, the patience replaced by cold indifference. And as she stared at the photo of him kissing her forehead, she finally admitted what her heart already knew. Something about Matt no longer made sense, and the truth behind his sudden detachment was about to destroy what little hope she had left. Jasmine's hands were shaking before she even opened the tablet. It was the same one Matt had always guarded like a secret vault. He would take it everywhere, even into the bathroom, and brush her off whenever she asked why. That night, he left it unlocked on the kitchen counter, careless or confident, she didn't know which. The screen flickered awake, and for a moment, she hesitated. Then curiosity won over fear. What she saw next made her entire body go cold. The first message was harmless, a simple goodnight text from a name she didn't recognize. But as she scrolled, the harmless words turned into sentences that hit like bullets. I miss you already. You looked amazing last night. Don't worry, she has no clue. Jasmine's eyes blurred as she read the timestamps. These weren't old messages. They were from last week. The same week he told her he was too tired to talk after filming. Her breath started coming in shallow bursts. She clicked on the chat history, scrolling faster, her heart thudding louder with every swipe. Photos, inside jokes, late-night video calls. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a fling. It was an entire second relationship unfolding while she was fighting to stay in the country. Matt wasn't distant because of stress. He was distant because he was busy building another life behind her back. She tried to tell herself it couldn't be true. Maybe it was old. Maybe someone hacked his account. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But then she saw a photo that crushed all those maybes. A picture of Matt at a restaurant, smiling at the camera, holding hands with the same woman whose name she had seen in those texts. It was dated 2 nights before her immigration interview. Jasmine dropped the tablet onto the couch like it burned. Her mind spun through every excuse he'd given, every late-night disappearance, every moment he told her she was overreacting. It wasn't paranoia. It was proof. He had been lying for months, and she'd been too blinded by love and fear to see it. Sometimes love hides its cruelty in the quiet moments you call trust. The apartment felt smaller, tighter. Jasmine could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make the pain stop echoing in her chest. But instead, she sat there in stunned silence. How could he? How could the man she defended, the man she risked everything for, betray her like this? The woman on the screen looked confident, happy, secure. Everything Jasmine no longer felt. When Matt came home later that night, Jasmine didn't say a word at first. She just stared at him, waiting for him to confess, waiting for a flicker of guilt or shame. But he didn't even notice her expression. He went straight to his phone, typing quickly, smiling down at the screen. That smile broke her. It wasn't for her anymore. She confronted him quietly at first, asking about the messages, the photos, the dinner. His reaction was ice. He denied, deflected, called her crazy, said she was imagining things. The words hit harder than shouting would have. Jasmine realized then that she wasn't losing him. She had already lost him. She told him she'd seen everything, that she knew about the woman. Matt didn't even flinch. He said, "I told you before, you're too dramatic." Then he walked away, leaving her standing there, shaking, surrounded by shattered illusions. Jasmine sank to the floor, the weight of the betrayal pressing down until she could barely breathe. All this time, she'd blamed immigration, stress, and bad luck for the distance between them. But now she understood. The cracks had started long before the visa trouble. Matt's betrayal wasn't a reaction to her problems. It was the cause of them. The next morning, Jasmine woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing. At first, she thought she was dreaming, until she saw Matt quietly folding his clothes into a suitcase. There was no fight, no explanation, just the sound of zippers and the soft shuffle of shoes being packed. She sat up, dazed, and asked where he was going. He didn't look at her when he said it. "I'm leaving for a while. You need space." Space. That word landed like a brick. Jasmine's voice cracked as she reminded him she had 30 days left before she'd be forced out of the country. He didn't answer. He just kept packing, calm, detached, almost mechanical. Every time she spoke, his silence grew louder, thicker, more final. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know what to say. It was the silence of someone who had already decided nothing needed to be said. She followed him from room to room, trying to make him look at her. She told him she'd fight harder for the appeal, that they could fix the mess together, that she still believed in them. But the more she talked, the colder he became. He didn't shout or argue. He simply sighed and muttered, "You make everything harder than it has to be." There's a kind of cruelty and calmness when someone else is breaking down. Jasmine's hands shook as she reached for him. "I left my home, my children, everything for this," she said, her voice trembling. "I did it for us." Matt finally turned then, his face empty. He looked at her like she was a stranger who had shown up at his door by mistake. "You're not my responsibility," he said flatly. Those words sliced through her. They didn't come with anger. They came with indifference, which hurt even more. Love doesn't die in shouting. It dies in tone, in that slow withdrawal of empathy. Jasmine stared at him, realizing there was nothing left to beg for. He had already walked away emotionally. His body was only catching up. He lifted his suitcase and walked toward the door. Jasmine stumbled after him, her words tumbling out in fragments. She said she couldn't survive being sent back to Panama alone. She reminded him of the promises he made, the way he said she was his future. He didn't even stop. He said, without turning around, "I never asked you to give up your life." Then the door clicked shut. The apartment fell into a stillness so heavy, it felt physical. For a long time, Jasmine didn't move. Her phone buzzed with missed calls from producers asking for updates. She ignored them. Minutes turned to hours. The camera crew arrived quietly, setting up outside the door, unsure whether to knock. Inside, Jasmine sat on the floor, knees pulled close, eyes unfocused. The tears had already dried, leaving only that hollow ache that comes after too much crying. When the camera light flicked on, she didn't react. She didn't shout or perform. She just sat there, silent, staring at the door he'd walked through, like she was waiting for it to open again, even though she knew it never would. The lens caught everything. The motionless stare, the faint tremor in her hands, the breath she couldn't quite catch. And for the first time, there was no act, no storyline, no fiery outburst to soften the truth. There was only a woman left alone, her voice gone, while the cameras rolled on without mercy. Behind the camera, the real scramble had begun. When news of the deportation and breakup hit production, the office turned into chaos. Producers were texting through the night, trying to decide whether to protect Jasmine or film her pain. Some claimed they cared, said she was too fragile, that continuing to shoot was cruel, but others saw it differently. They called it raw TV. In their world, suffering wasn't tragedy, it was footage. Meetings ran late into the night. Someone leaked that the network executives were split. Half wanted to pause filming, afraid of public backlash if viewers saw Jasmine collapse on screen. The other half said stopping now would ruin the season. Ratings were already climbing, and this was the kind of real-life disaster you couldn't script. To them, Jasmine's tears were marketable, her heartbreak measurable by engagement metrics. It was strange to see how quickly concern turned into strategy. Instead of asking how Jasmine was, they asked how much she was willing to show. A producer suggested having a therapist on set, not necessarily to help her, but to make it look like they were helping her. Someone else proposed adding support scenes, clips of the crew offering tissues or hugs. Optics mattered more than empathy. On social media, fans were already asking questions. Why had Jasmine gone silent? Why had Matt stopped posting? Was the deportation real or just for drama? Every minute that passed without an answer made the speculation wilder, and TLC knew it. Silence online wasn't a crisis. It was marketing. They planned to release the truth at the perfect moment, when anticipation was at its peak. This is what happens when heartbreak becomes content. Pain doesn't end, it gets scheduled. Inside her apartment, Jasmine had no idea how much of her breakdown had become corporate debate. She thought she was alone, spiraling in private, but every sob was being monitored through production updates. "We can't lose her arc," one assistant allegedly said. "This is the emotional centerpiece of the season." That word, arc, turned her life into structure, her pain into entertainment. A few crew members struggled with it. One refused to film after watching her cry on the kitchen floor, saying it felt like documenting a car crash. But most stayed quiet. They had jobs, deadlines, pressure from above. And in the world of reality TV, silence is compliance. The cameras stayed on. When Jasmine finally looked up and saw the red recording light glowing again, something inside her broke. Not the way it had when Matt left. This was a different kind of pain. Emptier. Colder. She realized that the only people still around weren't friends or supporters. They were storytellers, turning her misery into episodes. Every time she cried, someone whispered, "We got it." She stopped asking for breaks, stopped explaining her side. She started speaking like a cast member again, answering questions she didn't believe in. Somewhere between heartbreak and exhaustion, she understood she wasn't a woman anymore in their eyes. She was a headline, a thumbnail, a 2-hour special waiting to air. When production wrapped that night, a producer patted her on the shoulder and said, "This will make people feel for you." Jasmine nodded quietly, but her eyes told another story. She finally knew the truth. She hadn't been living her love story for months. She'd been filming her downfall. And every second of it now belonged to someone else. The days after filming stopped were a blur of panic and exhaustion. Jasmine barely slept, waking every hour to check her phone for updates that never came. Each morning began with the same crushing thought. 30 days left. Every tick of the clock was a countdown she couldn't stop. Her lawyer's voice on the phone was calm, professional, detached, but the words were brutal. The appeal was weak. Matt's withdrawal of support had destroyed her case. Without his affidavit, the government no longer saw her as a partner. They saw her as a visa violation waiting to be resolved. She tried to sound brave, asked about loopholes, extensions, anything that might buy time. But deep down, she knew it was over. After the calls ended, she would stare at the wall, trying to imagine what her life would look like back in Panama. Every version of it felt smaller, lonelier, and soaked in humiliation. At night, she paced her apartment, replaying everything in her head. The interview, the letter, the silence, the cheating. The cameras. She'd whisper Matt's name into the dark, half hoping he'd answer, half terrified he would. There were moments when she thought she heard his footsteps in the hallway, but it was always just the echo of her own panic. Her body started to betray her. Hands trembling, heart racing, breath shallow. The smallest sound made her jump. She called her lawyer again, then again, sometimes 5 or 6 times in a day, desperate for news. They told her to stay calm, to let the process run its course, but calm had become impossible. Online, fans noticed the silence. Jasmine, who once posted daily, suddenly disappeared. Her Instagram comments filled with speculation. Some said she'd been deported already. Others accused her of faking the whole thing for attention. A few posted old clips of her crying on the show with captions like Oscar-worthy. The cruelty stung more than she expected. For years, she'd tried to control her image, to prove she was more than the dramatic Latina stereotype. Now her pain had become a meme. Fame doesn't care who you are when the story turns against you. It just wants the next reaction. A few fellow cast members reached out privately. One sent a short message. "Stay strong, girl." Another warned her not to speak publicly until TLC gave permission. That was the hardest part. She couldn't even defend herself. Every detail of her own life was under contract. The show owned her silence as much as it had owned her heartbreak. The nights grew longer. The apartment, once filled with arguments and laughter, now felt like a waiting room for a life that was ending. She stopped answering the phone. Food went untouched. Her reflection in the mirror started to look like someone else. Paler, thinner, empty-eyed. One night, she stood by the window, looking out at the city lights she had dreamed about since she first arrived. All that noise, all that energy, and none of it belonged to her anymore. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered that she didn't blame anyone. Not Matt, not TLC, not even the system. Because deep down, she knew what was waiting for her at the end of this countdown. Her voice was barely audible as she said it, a confession to no one but herself. She had nothing left in Panama, no home, no stability, no sense of who she was anymore. And for the first time, she stopped crying. There were no tears left, only the quiet acceptance that sometimes the ending isn't explosive, it's just silence settling in. Jasmine stared at Matt's phone for nearly an hour before dialing the number. It wasn't courage that pushed her. It was exhaustion. She was done guessing, done wondering, done torturing herself with what-ifs. The contact name was simple, just a first name, no emojis, no disguise. That almost made it worse. It meant Matt wasn't even hiding her anymore. Her thumb hovered over the call button before she pressed it, her breath catching as the line rang. When the woman answered, her voice was soft, polite, almost gentle. "Hello?" Jasmine froze. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The sound of that calm voice made her chest tighten. She forced out the words, steady but low. "This is Jasmine." There was silence on the other end, long, heavy, and filled with recognition. "Oh," the woman finally said, "I was wondering if this would happen." The tone wasn't defensive. It was resigned. That was Jasmine's first shock. She had expected denial, maybe guilt, but not this strange, sad acceptance. She asked how long she and Matt had been together. The answer came slowly, measured. "A few months. He said you were finished, that you were staying in America for the show, not for him." Each word hit like a nail. Jasmine gripped the phone tighter. She said Matt had been sleeping in her bed, telling her they'd fight this deportation together. The woman sighed, and Jasmine could hear the crack in her composure. "He told me he was only staying until filming wrapped," she admitted. "He said you were unstable, that he felt trapped." The words unstable and trapped echoed through Jasmine's mind. She had spent years fighting that label, trying to show people she was passionate, not crazy. Now it was clear that the man she trusted most had weaponized her worst fear. Sometimes heartbreak doesn't come from losing someone. It comes from realizing they never defended you when it mattered. The conversation shifted. The woman sounded angry now, not at Jasmine, but at Matt. She said he had made promises to her too. Travel plans, talks of moving in together, the same lines Jasmine had once believed. They were both living the same illusion, written by the same man. For a fleeting moment, they weren't rivals anymore. They were two women connected by betrayal. The calm cracked. Jasmine's voice trembled as she said, "Do you love him?" The woman hesitated before replying, "I thought I did." Then she asked quietly, "Do you still?" Jasmine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The truth was too painful to admit. The line went quiet. Both women breathed into their phones, two strangers sharing the same wound. Then Jasmine whispered, "He told me I was his future." The other woman whispered back, "He told me that too." That was the breaking point. Jasmine dropped the phone onto the couch and sank to the floor, clutching her chest like she could stop her heart from falling apart. The air around her felt heavy, thick, almost unbreathable. Her sobs came in waves, each one sharper than the last. There was no camera crew, no producer, no Matt, only the echo of her own grief filling the empty apartment. When she finally looked up, the phone was still glowing on the floor. The call disconnected, the screen black again. But that silence said everything. Matt hadn't just betrayed her. He had broken two people at once and walked away untouched. And for the first time, Jasmine realized there was nothing left to confront. The fight was over. All that remained was the wreckage he left behind. The final week arrived like a fog that refused to lift. Every morning felt the same, gray, quiet, unreal. Jasmine had stopped crying days ago. Tears had given way to numbness, the kind that makes sound feel distant and light feel dim. Her suitcases stood open on the bed, half packed and untouched. She would fold a shirt, then unfold it again, as if repetition could delay time. Lawyers called to confirm her flight details, the date, the hour, the rules she needed to follow. Each conversation was clipped, transactional. No one said sorry. Bureaucracy doesn't apologize. It just moves forward. Jasmine's appeals had failed. Matt's name was no longer attached to her file. The future she fought for now existed only as paperwork she wasn't allowed to contest. She made one last attempt to reach out. An email to the immigration office, a message to the producers, a text to Matt that read, "Please, I need closure." None of them replied. It was as if the world had agreed to move on while she was still standing still. The crew had packed up days earlier. The apartment was silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator. She sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Matt's shoes once were, where his laughter had echoed between arguments. The silence was so complete that she could hear the sound of her own breathing. Sometimes compassion comes from the past, not the present. On the fifth night, her phone lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months, Gino. For a moment she thought it was a mistake, but the message was short and unmistakably real. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Her throat tightened. Out of everyone who could have reached out, it was him, the man she once loved, the one she'd fought with, cried over, and sworn to forget. The message wasn't long, but it felt heavier than anything else that week. Gino didn't offer to fix anything. He didn't make excuses or promises. He just reached across the distance and acknowledged her pain. Jasmine typed a reply, deleted it, then typed again. Finally, she sent, "I'll be okay. Thank you." It was the first time she had written those words without believing them. But somehow, it didn't matter. In that tiny exchange, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Humanity. As her departure day approached, Jasmine packed the last of her clothes, sealing away not just her belongings, but the pieces of the life she had built here. She unplugged the lamp beside her bed, turned off the kitchen light, and left the key on the counter. The apartment didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a set after filming had wrapped, empty, cleaned out, ready for the next storyline. The car arrived before dawn. The air was cold and heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin. She pulled her hood up, stepped outside, and didn't look back. The driver helped her load the suitcases into the trunk. But Jasmine moved slowly, every step deliberate. At the airport, the terminal buzzed with normal life. Families hugging, children running, people complaining about delays. She walked through it all in silence, her passport clutched in trembling hands. When she reached the gate, she paused, staring at the doors that would take her back to the country she no longer recognized as home. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then, quietly, she exhaled and took a single step forward. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Jasmine Pineda walked through them, leaving behind the country that had promised her everything and given her nothing but heartbreak. The moment Jasmine's departure leaked online, the internet went into a frenzy. Screenshots, rumors, and shaky airport footage flooded social media within hours. Fans who had followed her every episode were suddenly arguing in comments and group chats like witnesses to a public funeral. Half the viewers were furious at Matt, calling him cold, manipulative, heartless. The other half blamed Jasmine, saying her temper and unpredictability had finally caught up to her. The truth, as always, didn't matter anymore. It was the reaction that kept the clicks coming. TLC's silence made everything worse. The network said nothing, neither confirming nor denying what had happened. Their social media accounts kept posting cheerful teasers for other couples, avoiding the storm they knew was brewing. That silence became gasoline. Fans started filling in the blanks themselves, rewriting the story in real time. Some called it karma, others called it abuse. Every theory sounded plausible when no one was correcting it. Within days, hashtags like "Ya Justice for Jasmine" and "On Boycott Matt" began trending. Fan pages posted side-by-side screenshots of Jasmine crying and Matt smiling at his new girlfriend. Reddit threads read like digital courtrooms. People analyzed every micro-expression, every caption, every clip, trying to decide who the real villain was. There were even petitions demanding TLC release the full unedited footage, as if transparency could undo heartbreak. Meanwhile, Matt vanished from public view. His social media went dark. No new photos, no statements, no apologies. Sources said he was told by the network to stay quiet until the finale aired. Silence became his defense, but to viewers, it felt like guilt. The longer he stayed quiet, the louder the backlash grew. His new girlfriend's account had to be locked after fans flooded her posts with thousands of angry comments. In reality TV, tragedy doesn't end when the cameras stop. It multiplies when the audience takes control. Some tried to defend him, pointing out that relationships on the show were built under impossible pressure. They said TLC's editing turned every couple into caricatures, exaggerating flaws and cutting compassion for drama. A few argued that Jasmine knew what she was signing up for, that she had played her emotions for attention. Others pushed back hard, saying no contract could justify filming someone's breakdown for entertainment. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It had become a cultural argument about ethics, responsibility, and how much suffering audiences were willing to consume. TLC insiders stayed quiet. But leaks began to surface. Crew members whispered about producers being divided over how much of Jasmine's final days should air. Some said it was too raw, too personal. Others believed it was exactly what the network needed to keep ratings high. Viewers could feel it coming. The announcement everyone dreaded yet secretly anticipated. 2 weeks later, TLC posted a single black teaser card with white text, "Special episode, Jasmine's Final Days." The caption said it would be a 2-hour exclusive, with never-before-seen footage and interviews from those closest to the situation. Within minutes, the promo went viral. Comment sections exploded again. Some said it was exploitation, others said they couldn't wait to watch. The paradox was painful but predictable. Everyone claimed to be outraged, yet no one could look away. The countdown to the special had begun, and for the first time, Jasmine's story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the audience who demanded closure, and to the network that knew heartbreak still sold better than any happy ending. When the credits finally rolled on Jasmine's story, the noise didn't stop. It only quieted into a kind of collective guilt. Viewers who once argued over her every outburst were suddenly reflective. They had watched a woman fall apart in real time, replayed her pain for entertainment, and called it reality. Now that the season was over, there was a strange emptiness. The world moved on to the next scandal, but her name lingered in headlines like an echo no one wanted to admit they helped create. Producers celebrated record-breaking ratings. Executives called it the most authentic season yet. But behind closed doors, a few insiders reportedly felt uneasy. They had seen too much. The sleepless nights, the shaking hands, the way Jasmine's laughter turned into silence over weeks of filming. They knew that what audiences called drama was actually despair. Yet in television, numbers matter more than nerves, and pain packaged correctly always trends. Matt never made a public statement. He was seen once, leaving a restaurant with his new girlfriend, avoiding questions. When fans shouted Jasmine's name, he looked away. To some, his silence was cruelty. To others, it was survival. Either way, it said everything. You can leave a show, but you can't outrun the version of yourself it creates. For Jasmine, life in Panama began quietly. Local reports said she was staying with family, off camera, offline. rebuilding slowly. Friends described her as fragile but determined to start again. She wasn't seeking pity. She was trying to remember who she was before every decision became content. The woman who once chased love across borders was now learning to exist without an audience. Fame doesn't heal. It freezes you in the moment everyone decided you were most broken. Immigration, heartbreak, and television all share one cruel trait. They reduce people to categories: approved or denied, loved or left, trending or forgotten. Jasmine's story blurred those lines, forcing viewers to confront how much suffering feels acceptable when it's wrapped in entertainment. Her pain became a mirror, reflecting the uncomfortable truth that we often mistake empathy for engagement. Watching someone's collapse is easier than admitting we're part of the reason it happened. TLC's 2-hour special aired and millions tuned in. Some cried, some tweeted outrage, others simply watched and moved on. The network promised counseling resources at the end, a symbolic gesture that couldn't erase the fact that heartbreak had been their season's biggest hit. They said Jasmine's story would raise awareness, but awareness wasn't what sold ad space. Emotion did. Somewhere across the ocean, Jasmine was probably sleeping when her episode aired. Her image flickered across living rooms, phones, and tablets, but she wasn't watching. She didn't need to. She already knew the ending. It wasn't closure, but it was peace. The quiet kind that comes after surviving something meant to destroy you. As the final scene faded, one truth remained. In reality, TV, no one ever fully leaves. The memories, the edits, the headlines, they live on, reshaped, retold, rewatched. And behind every shocking story, there's a person trying to piece themselves back together when the cameras stop rolling. Because when one star falls, another secret rises. And next, we uncover who TLC tried to silence next.